with today's program. Let me tell you that coming into Washington, D.C., this town is on edge. I spent a little time up in my hotel room here at the Hyatt. We were watching the newscasts, and people are very nervous about the possibility of terrorism. And security is tight. We were at the airport, and when I came in, my producer, Eric Braverman, along with Greg Cockrell, they're both producing the show this week. Eric came to the airport carrying his camcorder, which had the lens cap on. And a gentleman in plain clothes came running up to him and said, "Take that cap off and you're under arrest." So people are very jittery about security here in our nation's capital. And that's one of the issues we're going to be discussing here on KFI as we broadcast live from Washington, D.C. Our first guest in our first segment of the program today is David Peleg. He is the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. And I welcome you to the program today. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
If you could sit a little closer to the microphone, let's talk a little bit, first of all, about where things stand now as far as Israel is concerned. I saw a news report this morning, actually the same report on several networks, saying that Israel is at the highest point of readiness it can be at. Is that the case right now?
As you know, this is not an Israeli conflict. It's not a conflict between Israel and an Arab country. It is a conflict between the free world led by the United States and Iraq. Iraq is trying to turn the attention of the world community from the Gulf to the Middle East and to turn it to be a conflict with Israel. We hope that this will not happen. But if Iraq decides to involve Israel militarily, of course Israel, like any other country in the world, will defend itself.
Now, one of the things that was discussed was the possibility that the United States had asked Israel, in effect, to take a hit. In other words, if Iraq had struck Israel, the United States said, sit back and let the United States do any retaliating. Yeah, is that the case?
The position of Israel, and the position is well known to the United States, is that we do not intend to attack Iraq or any other Arab country. We're not going to preempt, although we are taking on ourselves a certain risk, because everybody knows the Iraqi military preparations and the Iraqi statement and threats against Israel, but we have taken this risk on ourselves, so we are not going to preempt. But if Iraq attacks us, of course Israel, like any other country of the world, has the sole responsibility to decide how to defend itself.
I was watching other news reports in the past 24 hours that seemed to say that Israelis seem to almost be, and I don't like to use the word panic lightly, but they seem to be in a state of certainly panic buying. I saw empty grocery shelves. I saw people buying sheets of plastic to cover up their windows. I saw people buying books on how to protect against chemical weapons. Does Israel believe officially that there's a good possibility that it will be struck by Iraq?
We always come from the supposition of the worst-case scenario in order not to be surprised. And we have taken precautionary measures. I think the picture that sometimes we see on television, I think it's exaggerated. I can assure you that everything is done in Israel in a mature and responsible way. There is no panic. Life continues in Israel, but definitely we are concerned and we have taken precautionary measures.
Is it Israel's position that the United States has done a good job in handling this situation with Operation Desert Shield, with Saddam Hussein, with the coalition?
I think that the United States did the right thing in standing up to the challenge of Saddam Hussein and in leading a wide-range coalition in order to deal with the danger of the aggression of Saddam Hussein.
I want to talk a little bit now about Israel and its position in the Middle East, because certainly Saddam Hussein has done everything he can to drag the question of homeland into this issue of his invading Kuwait. What is the Israeli official response to that position by Saddam Hussein?
It's not only the Israeli official response, but I think that everyone who views the situations and follows the situation knows that Saddam Hussein did not invade Kuwait in order to help the Palestinian people. He did not decide to murder Kuwaitis and to destroy this country for the Palestinians. He decided to do it for his own ambitions.
I see in a story here in USA Today that there are folks in Israel complaining about lack of access to a number of the operational details of Operation Desert Shield. It says here that Israel is not in the direct link-up and that Lawrence Eagleburger was coming to Israel to try to fix that situation. Has Israel been in on all of the activities, all of the planning from the beginning? Is that an accurate quote?
Of course, nobody could and nobody should refer to specific details on such an issue, which is a very sensitive issue. But one can look at the visit of Mr. Eagleburger to Israel as another link in the cooperation and coordination which exists between Israel and the United States in different issues.
All right, we're going to take a break here, and when we continue, we're going to take some of your telephone calls. Our guest is David Peleg. He is the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy here in Washington, D.C. We've done something a little different with the telephone numbers today because being that we are being seen on C-SPAN across the country, we wanted to make sure that enough Southern California calls get through. So we've split up our telephone numbers, one just for Southern California. That's our toll-free number, 1-800-553-4640. So that's anywhere in Southern California today. You can call us toll-free at 1-800-553-4640. From anywhere else, whether it be Southern California or anywhere else you can see this broadcast or hear it, you call us at area code 213-520-1534. That's area code 213-520-1KFI. And we'll continue our conversation. We are coming to you live from the Hyatt Regency overlooking Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. We'll be broadcasting here for the earlier part of the week anyway. Still have no idea if we're going to go through Wednesday or Thursday, definitely through Wednesday. And it depends on what the events are, and we'll decide what we're going to do after that. Stay tuned. I'm Tom Leykis. It's 3:15. We're live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. Time for a KFI Middle East News Update. Here's Barbara Whiteside in the KFI News setting. 3:19, we are live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. We're talking with David Peleg, who is the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. Mr. Peleg, what about the American perception of Israel? Do Americans have a good perception of the country? Do we have the right attitude in terms of Israel as an ally? Do Americans accept, in your opinion, the concept that we must stand firm with Israel?
I think that from my trip across this great country, I get the impression of a great support of Israel from the different regions in this country, and we are very encouraged by this.
Let's go to our telephones. Our telephone number again, anywhere in Southern California, 1-800-553-4640. Or you can call us from anywhere, area code 213-520-1534. That's 5201-KFI. Let's start with Frank in Studio City, California. You're on KFI. Hello.
Hi, Tom.
How you doing, Frank?
I'm fine. I'd like to ask Mr. Peleg, well, first of all, it's pretty clear that Israel has kept purposefully silent on whether they're going to use nuclear weapons in defense or not. I'm sure it's to keep Iraq on guard against that kind of thing. But I'd like to ask the question in a different way, and that is, would Israel regard an Iraqi attack as sufficient grounds to launch nuclear weapons?
Israel's position on nuclear weapons is very, very clear. Israel will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weaponry into the Middle East.
So they would not launch it in defense against conventional bombing?
Israel will not be the first country, as I said, to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for the call, Frank. Do we have any reason to believe that Saddam Hussein could surprise us by having nuclear weapons of his own?
I think he's working on it. As you remember, Tom, they were working on it years ago, And when we knew that the Iraqi nuclear reactor is becoming operational, we have attacked this nuclear reactor. At the time, many condemned us. Many of those who condemned us say today that we made quite a service to the international community.
Saddam Hussein said to the Iraqi parliament yesterday that there are weapons in his arsenal that would astonish his enemies and surprise his friends. Do we have any idea what he means by that?
We know that he is developing a lot of non-conventional types of weapons like nuclear, chemical, and biological. Some of them he's already used, the chemical ones, against his own people and against neighboring countries.
We are talking with David Peleg. He is the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. Let's say hello to Bob in Omaha, Nebraska on KFI. Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Okay.
My question revolves the Soviet Union, the current unrest in the Soviet Union. There's a lot of hardliners that resent the fact that the United States is in the Middle East. What would happen if Gorbachev is out of the picture and somebody like the KGB took control of the Soviet Union? How vulnerable would not only the Middle East be of nuclear, but also the United States?
Bob, this is, of course, a speculative question. We supported always the policies of Gorbachev, the Perestroika, and we hope that President Gorbachev will continue with his liberal policies.
I'm glad that the United States has a friend in Israel, and I hope nothing but the best for Israel and the American people.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Bob, for the call. Any response to what happened in Lithuania? Of course, as we know, the folks surrounding President Gorbachev have said that Gorbachev did not order the attack on Lithuanians yesterday. Any response to that?
As I said to the questioner, we are concerned, like all the international community, what is happening in Lithuania, and we hope that the policies of President Gorbachev, the liberal policies, will prevail and continue.
Alan is calling from Tucson, Arizona on KFI at 323. Hello.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. Yes, I'd like to ask your guest. I'm trying to publicize an idea called DMZ 2000, which stands for Global Demilitarization, in both nuclear and conventional, for the beginning of the next millennium. And I wanted to ask your guest what his country would think if other countries would agree to mutual verifiable treaties and say reduce their military budgets 10% a year or whatever, and until we could bring them down and convert them to peaceful purposes. Would his country be willing to participate in a verifiable multilateral agreement like that?
I think that one should speak separately about conventional and non-conventional demilitarization. We said that we are ready to begin a negotiation on creation of the Middle East as a nuclear-free zone, but this, of course, will need the commitment of all countries in the area.
All right, thank you for the call, Alan. 325, this is KFI-AM 640. My name is Tom Leykis. David Peleg, the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy, joins us live from Washington, D.C. This is Henry in Garden Grove, California. Henry, you're on KFI. Hello.
Hello, Tom. I have a question for the Israeli representative. I wonder what his opinion might be. I believe the whole issue of war is somewhat obsolete, simply because it evades the issue of the fight is really all about, and what it is about is the control of the flow of oil to the world. If there was some sort of an alternative energy policy that the world might somehow agree upon, it would seem that we would put a man like Saddam Hussein out of business.
I fully agree with you that it is extremely important, and I know that the United States is working on it to develop alternative sources of energy. And I think that an extra effort on the development of such alternative energy resources will be very important and will increase stability in the world.
I mean, wouldn't we all agree that the White House has evidence right now that could clearly solve the the entire dilemma we're in, and it seems that it would save a lot of human lives, and I'm sure we all would agree that that would be probably the brightest alternative.
If anybody had the formula for the creation of an alternative energy sources, I think first of all he will become a billionaire overnight, and he will solve the question. The problem is that the issue is much more complex, and nobody has such a formula.
Thank you very much for the call. Let's talk a little bit about Kuwait and the emir and the regular form of government that exists when Saddam Hussein is not occupying that nation. Is it important for that emirate to go back to the way it was? Do they need to change anything that they are doing from the position of Israel?
I think it's up for the Kuwaitis to decide. Unfortunately, many of the Kuwaitis were deported from Kuwait by the Iraqis, and Iraqis took their place. I think that your question brings to mind a broader question, and this is the question of democracy in the Middle East. We see now more democracy in in Eastern Europe, more democracy in Latin America, and in both these areas, the United States took a leading role in promoting democracy in these two areas. Maybe now it's a time for more effort to bring democracy into the Middle East. And once there are democratic regimes in the Middle East, I'm sure that this will influence positively stability and the prospect for peace in our area.
Is it reasonable to expect that the United States could pull that off?
No, but I'm sure that the United States, as I think today the only big power, can influence the course of events, as it did in Latin America and Eastern Europe.
Let's say hello to Colleen, a first-time caller from Venice, California. Colleen, you're on KFI at 328. Hello.
Hi, Mr. Peleg. I wanted to know if there has been a surge of Israelis returning to Israel to help, if there's a call for it, and how would Israelis make that decision?
I couldn't hear you clear. Can you repeat the question, please?
I'd like to know if there's a lot of Israelis returning to Israel to help, if there's a call for it, and how Israelis would make that decision if something happened.
These are, of course, things that one does not discuss on the radio. The situation in Israel is, as I say, stable, and there was not such a call for Israelis to come back to help in an emergency. Of course, we would love to see all Israelis who are outside of Israel back in Israel.
Thank you very much for the call, Colleen, and we will continue our conversation. Our guest, the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy here in Washington, D.C., David Peleg. More of your telephone calls coming up. Toll-free in Southern California, 1-800-553-4640. That's 1-800-553-4640 from Southern California. You can also call us from anywhere else. We're being seen on the C-SPAN cable network across the country at area code 213-520-1534. That's area code 213-520-1-KFI. My name is Tom Leykis. It's 3:30 in Los Angeles at KFI-AM 640. And time now to go to the KFI News Center where Barbara Whitesides has the latest. Good afternoon, Barbara.
Well, good afternoon to you, Tom. Some of the stories we're covering for you this hour.
3:34:26 now before 4 o'clock in Southern California over KFI-AM 640. My name is Tom Leykis. This is where we talk about the issues Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 in the afternoon as you head home. Thank you for joining us. You are not only joining us on KFI, there are folks across the country watching this broadcast on the C-SPAN cable network. You can tune into that as well, but certainly we prefer you to hear it on KFI, obviously. But nonetheless, we are joining you from Washington, D.C. We are at the beautiful Hyatt Regency Hotel overlooking Capitol Hill. And still to come this afternoon, we'll be joined by Massachusetts Congressman Barney Frank, Kuwaiti Ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Fabah. We'll talk with Congressman Bob Dornan of Orange County and former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. It's all coming up here on KFI-AM 640. David Peleg is with us. He's the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy, and we've been talking about the situation that has everybody's attention right now. Let us continue our conversation. Mary is a first-time caller to KFI from Los Angeles. Hi, Mary. You're on KFI.
Hi, Tom. I'd like to ask David, should we go to war and win, what happens next? Who's going to maintain and enforce what we've been fighting for? And what will ensure against future invasions?
I think that what is important that the Iraqi aggression, that the end is put to the Iraqi aggression. This aggression has been a challenge for the international community, and it should be dealt with.
Does Saddam Hussein have to be killed in order for that to happen?
It's not a personal issue of Saddam Hussein, but in order to solve the situation, the whole issue of the Iraqi military infrastructure, the conventional and the non-conventional, should be dealt with.
Thank you very much for the call, Mary. We appreciate it. Here's Troy in Chula Vista, California. You're on KFI. Hello.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I've got a question for the minister. Has Israel received very many displaced Kuwaitis or Saudis? And if so, is Israel housing them or anything like that?
What Israel received is Palestinians who were deported or left the Gulf state. Some of them came to the territory, to Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, to their families. I think that the Palestinians in the territory is in a very peculiar situation. Some of the financial assistance they used to get is not coming anymore. Many Palestinians were deported from Gulf state, and I think that they should blame only one address, and the address is Saddam Hussein.
So Israel is not helping them or supporting these displaced people, providing any assistance of this sort?
Israel was not asked to receive any Saudis or any Kuwaitis, but as I said, some Palestinians who fled from the Gulf states came to their families in the West Bank.
Thank you very much for the call. 3:38:22 now before 4 o'clock. Tom Leykis on KFI-AM 640. We are live from Washington, D.C. This is Bob in Galveston, Texas. Bob, you're on KFI. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Does Israel intend to annex the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, or do they plan to keep it under military occupation indefinitely? And if that's the case, is the large influx of Soviet Jews emigrating to Israel, will they be settled there?
As you know, Bob, in 1967, when all these territories came to be under Israeli control, we have made a decision, and the decision is not to annex Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and keep them as a deposit for future peace negotiation. In this peace negotiations, hopefully, the permanent status of all these territories will be determined. This was the situation in 1967, and this is the situation today. We are lucky to receive in Israel thousands of our brethren from the Soviet Union. This last year, 200,000 arrived, and we hope more will come this year. We are not directing them anywhere in Israel. They make the decision, and very, very few make the decision to live in the West Bank or Gaza.
Thank you very much for the call, Bob. Speaking of the West Bank, Saddam Hussein has repeatedly been comparing his occupation of Kuwait to Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. How do you respond to that?
I think this is ridiculous, because if you compare the two, you see that there is no comparison between the two. On the one hand, in the Iraqi case, you have a classic case of unprovoked aggression. On the other hand, on the other case, which is the territories, you have a classic case of war of self-defense. And there shouldn't be any comparison between the two. There is not even comparison between the Security Council resolutions on the two issues. On the Iraqi issue, there is a Security Council resolutions calling for unconditional withdrawal. In the case of the territories, the Security Council Resolution number 242 calls for negotiation between the Arab countries and Israel to solve the outstanding issues between ourselves. So there is no comparison between the two, and it was done artificially by Saddam Hussein with the support of the PLO in order to divert the attention of the international community from the situation in the Gulf, in which he is isolated, to the situation in the territories.
Has the negotiation called for in 242 taken place adequately?
For negotiation, you must have two. The one, which is Israel, you have. But unfortunately, until now, we don't have a partner for negotiation, and we hope to have such a partner soon.
Will all this Operation Desert Shield and the United States involvement and Saudi Arabia and Egypt getting together with the United States possibly pave the way for that to happen?
We hope so. We hope that the fact that you have this coalition led by the United States will lead to more moderate policies of the Arab countries which are members of the coalition. And we hope and we know that the United States, in its conversation with those countries, with Saudi Arabia and with Syria, is trying to persuade them to move from confrontation to negotiation with Israel.
Let's talk about this coalition for a moment. Do you believe the coalition of nations ganging up right now to try to solve this problem involving Saddam Hussein, Iraq, Kuwait, will hold together?
I think that when one looks at the coalition, I think that one conclusion is the coalition is concentrating on one issue and one issue only, which is the issue of the Gulf, and one shouldn't make any conclusions from this coalition on the positions of the members of the coalition on other issues like the Arab-Israeli conflict.
We'll continue our conversation with David Peleg. He is the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. My name is Tom Leykis, and we will continue our conversation with Mr. Peleg, and more of your telephone calls coming up. 3:43:17 now, before 4 o'clock. Tom Leykis, live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. 3:44:16 now, before 4 o'clock, live from Washington, D.C. My name is Tom Leykis, and this is KFI-AM 640. Time for a KFI Middle East news update. From the KFI News Center, here's Barbara Whitesides.
Thanks, Tom. Here's what's going on right now. Iraq's ambassador to the United Nations...
3:46:14 now, before 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. Tom Leykis, live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. Tonight at 7 will be the Joe Crummy Show. At 10, Dr. Laura Schlesinger and the Larry King Show at 1 a.m. That's our lineup tonight here on KFI-AM 640. We're coming to you live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel overlooking Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C. Joining us after the news at 4, Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts will join us as this conversation continues during this period of very high awareness. Everybody concerned about what's going to happen in the Middle East. As you know, the deadline is tomorrow, and as a matter of fact, the deadline for Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait is tomorrow night at midnight Eastern, which is just 2 hours after the end of our program tomorrow night. We'll be here on Wednesday as well, and everybody is watching the news and trying to figure out what's going on. We are joined this hour by David Peleg. He's the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. We're also being seen on C-SPAN, the cable television network across America. And we continue with Vincent, a first-time caller to KFI from Mount Vernon, New York. Vincent, you're on KFI. Hello.
How are you, Tom?
Doing fine.
Okay, listen, what I wanted to ask your guest is that shouldn't the United States pull their troops out of Saudi Arabia and then bomb them from the air, because I feel that they're going to take too many lives like this? Wouldn't it be easier for an airstrike than a ground strike?
As I said, Vincent, in the beginning, it is not an Israeli conflict. It is a conflict between the free world and Iraq. We have kept a low profile since the beginning of the conflict. And of course, we did not and do not give advice, military, tactical or other, to the United States.
How did the United States take the news that Israel would strike back if struck by Iraq? Was the United States happy about that, copacetic about it? Were they upset about it?
I think the United States accepts the fact that Israel, like any other country in the world, if attacked by another country, has the right to decide in what way it is going to respond and defend itself.
Thank you for the call, Vincent. Here's Chris, a first-time caller from San Diego on KFI. Hello.
Hi, Tom. Early in the crisis in August, Iraq stated that the United States knew about the upcoming invasion and chose to keep silent. And Iraq took that gesture as a go-ahead. Do you think there's any truth in that? And if so, can you speculate on why the United States would have kept silent?
I don't think, as far as I know, that there any truth in it. I think that the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait surprised everyone, and I think that the American reaction, immediate reaction, to stand up to the Iraqi aggression was the right one.
Thank you for the call, Chris. Carl in Watertown, New York. You're on KFI at 349. Hello.
Hi, you were just talking about how if Iraq did attack, or as you were, if the United States would attack Iraq, that Israel, and that Iraq would attack Israel then. If Israel does strike back to Iraq, are they going to just do it no matter what, and no matter what the United States is doing, or do they have plans coinciding with the United States in that event?
As I said before, we do not have any intention to attack Iraq or any other Arab country. If attacked, of course, it's our right to define how we are going to defend ourselves. Of course, there is ongoing coordination on different issues between Israel and the United States, and the visit of Undersecretary Eagleberger to Israel was one link in this series of coordinations.
Thank you for the call. Jeff in Honolulu, Hawaii. You're on KFI at 351. Hello.
Yeah, just a quick comment and a couple of questions for Mr. Peleg. There are countless millions of people around the world who, at this moment, are hoping and praying for a peaceful resolution to the Gulf crisis. And the question is, one, do you feel a peaceful resolution is still possible? And two, if a miracle should occur and Saddam Hussein does decide to pull out from Kuwait at the last minute, then what? Do you feel he should be removed from power and held accountable for the aggressions he's already committed against Kuwait?
Can we come out of this situation with Saddam Hussein still in charge in Kuwait, in Iraq?
Jeff, first of all, let me add our voice to the millions who still hope that there can be a peaceful and political solution to the conflict, and that Saddam Hussein will decide to implement all parts of the Security Council resolution. We hope that it is still possible, but every hour that passes, of course, limits the number of hours which are being left. If Saddam Hussein will decide to withdraw from Kuwait, this will still leave us with a problem. And the problem is the Iraqi military might, conventional and non-conventional, which he may use whenever he decides to use it, as he used it on August the 2nd against Kuwait. And I think that this problem must be dealt with, and there are quite a numerous options how to deal with it.
Can you give us some examples?
I think that the options are, as I said, numerous. Some of them were mentioned, like
can we leave Saddam Hussein in power in Iraq? Are you saying that he has to be out no matter what?
No, the question is not personally of Saddam Hussein, but of his army, his weapons, the nuclear weapons, the chemical weapons, and the biological weapons.
Are you saying then if Saddam Hussein were removed from power, we'd still have the same problem with whoever replaced him?
As I said, it's not a question of Saddam Hussein or who is the leader of Iraq, but the Iraqi policies and the Iraqi army.
Thank you for the call, Jeff, and we will continue our final moments coming up with David Peleg. He's the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. We're coming to you live from the Hyatt Regency in Washington, D.C. I'm Tom Leykis, 3:54, 6 now, before 4 o'clock. This is KFI-AM 640. Time now to go to the KFI Traffic Center with Mark Dennis, brought to you by Georgetown Ethan Allen. Mark.
And good afternoon to you, Tom. Only
3:58, 2 now, before 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. Tom Leykis, live from Washington over KFI-AM 640. Our final moments with David Peleg, the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. Without divulging any specifics, obviously I wouldn't ask you to do that, many Americans perceive that Israel has superior intelligence, not only in the Middle East, but in general, to many countries, including the United States. Would that be an accurate statement?
I think for us it's a matter of survival, because we are surrounded by Arab countries and the sea, and for us it is a matter of existence to know things that are happening on the other side of the border which have an effect on our security.
What do you think is going to happen next? Purely speculation now. Are we going to be at war on the 16th, from what you've heard? Do you think we're going to sit out there in the desert for a while? Just your own speculation.
I don't think I should speculate, and this is such a sensitive situation. As I said, we still hope that a political solution will be found which will bring stability in the area and will not necessitate the use of force. But unfortunately, the voices that we hear from Baghdad are very bellicose.
Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be here.
David Peleg, the Minister of Information for the Israeli Embassy. Coming up after the news at 4 o'clock, we're going to be talking with Democratic Congressman from Massachusetts, Barney Frank. We're going to find out where he stood the other day in the debate. Of course, you may have watched the debates on C-SPAN, or you may have seen them elsewhere. We're going to talk to him about what the United States is going to do next. And should we have given sanctions more time to work? Other questions as well. Your telephone calls coming up. Stay tuned. I'm Tom Leykis. It's 4 o'clock at KFI Los Angeles, more stimulating talk radio.
The glimmer of hope beginning to...
Thank you for tuning into KFI-AM 640. My name is Tom Leykis. We are broadcasting live from Washington, D.C. at the Hyatt Regency overlooking Capitol Hill. We are here Monday through Friday on KFI from 3 to 7 in the afternoon as you head home. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Joe Crummy tonight at 7 o'clock on KFI, Dr. Laura Schlesinger at 10, and the Larry King Show at 1 a.m. That's our lineup tonight here on KFI AM 640. We are broadcasting to you live from Washington, where it's 8 minutes after 7 o'clock in the evening. The weather is cold. People are jittery about security here in our nation's capital. We told you about our experience at the airport today. I understand that flights are even delayed because they're giving a little extra time to check the bags of people coming in and out and check other things going on at the airport as well. I see a lot more security out there. And, we could ignore this and just say, well, we don't want to get you upset. But we have to be honest. That's what was going on when we arrived today. We are also being seen today, if you're just joining our program, we're being seen on the C-SPAN cable network, which is being seen coast to coast right now. So you might notice during the program we're getting calls from places other than Southern California. And those calls are, of course, welcome. Joining me in this hour is Congressman Barney Frank, a Democrat from Massachusetts, from Congressional District Number 4. That's the area south and west of Boston, and I thank you for joining us today. Let us talk a little bit, and if we can get the Congressman's mic up here, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the debate on the use of force in the Middle East. Was that debate just a formality? Did it accomplish anything important?
It certainly was not just a formality when you look at that vote in the Senate of 52-47. Even the vote in the House, historically there has never been such a small margin when Congress decided to authorize the use of force. And there were two things going on. One was the very important, obviously particularly timely question about whether or not force should be used in the Gulf today. But there was a broader question as well that will be seen, I think, later to have had more importance than people now focus on it. And that was this question about whether or not a president may go to war without congressional approval at all. George Bush, following in the footsteps of many of his predecessors, was arguing that he had the right to send Americans into war in an offensive capacity. Everyone agrees that the president's got the right to do what has to be done to defend against any attack. But George Bush was saying that he had the right to make a conscious choice to send Americans into a war situation on his own, with or without congressional authorization. Many of us thought that was a very big mistake, that when a democracy contemplates making the toughest decision it can make, sending its young people into a situation to kill or be killed, which from time to time in this world we have to do, in my judgment. But given its dimensions, it ought to be done by the fullest possible participation, and that it's a great mistake to have the president alone do it. The House on Saturday, the very same House that voted by 80 votes to let George Bush go to war, voted by a very large margin, 3-1, that Congress had the right now and in the future to decide that. And so I think that accomplished a great deal. I think we have helped resolve what has been an ongoing constitutional issue, and I don't think you will see a president again assert, as George Bush and many presidents before him did, that they can go to war without any vote of Congress.
What do you think George Bush might have done had Congress not approved the use of force?
He hadn't said this, but I cannot believe that he would have defied Congress. Among other things, the question of fairness and concern for the young people has to then be paramount. One of the worst things you can do is to send your young people into that terrible situation known as war without the fullest support of the country behind them. And if one or the other houses or both houses had voted not to give that authorization, I think the president would have been making a very grave error if he had ordered them in. And I think he came to understand that. Let me give you what I think is the evidence. A couple of months ago, the president was asserting that he had a right to send the troops into war no matter what happened. And if you had said to him at that point, Mr. President, we have a proposal to put to you, we are going to put up a resolution in the Senate authorizing you to go into war, and you're going to win it by 52-47, with everyone knowing that the absent senator would have voted against you. So you're going to win by a very small margin, 2 votes. Do you want that? He would have said no a couple of months ago. He would have said, no, that's worse than nothing. By Saturday, he was describing that 52-47 vote as a victory, correctly for him, because his side got the majority. I think that meant his recognition that while the vote was a small one, it was essential for his going to war. And what we saw was the evolution in President Bush's discussion of a 52-47 vote from something which initially he was describing as a whittling away of his inherent right to do whatever he wanted, to where he recognized that as a narrow but nonetheless necessary democratic vote. And I think he would not have been able to go to war and would not have gone to war if either house had voted not to.
How would you rate President Bush's handling of Operation Desert Shield right up to that vote in Congress?
Well, it's mixed. He deserves an enormous amount of credit for his initial response and on through, I think, until November. That is, and by the way, people who make the analogy, as we've heard, to Munich, ought to understand how incorrect their analogy is in this sense. What happened in Munich, and this is relevant to the question you asked me about President Bush, Adolf Hitler took over Austria, a small nation which he said was really part of Germany. He then moved, having consolidated that, against Czechoslovakia. And the Allies sat back and let him march into Czechoslovakia. Well, if you're going to do an analogy to Munich, you ought to do it as accurately as possible. Kuwait, sadly for them, becomes Austria in this occasion, the gobbling up of the small country. Czechoslovakia is really analogous to Saudi Arabia. And unlike the British and French and other leaders in Munich, George Bush deserves a lot of credit, because what he did when Saddam Hussein, having taken over Kuwait in a lightning strike because it's so small, when he threatened Saudi Arabia, George Bush moved very quickly, and I supported that. He got the troops over there, and he was widely supported. No one is saying that in America the president can't move in that kind of a responsive situation very quickly. Beyond that, I think George Bush deserves a lot of credit. He not only mobilized our troops to stop aggression, but at the outset, he was doing very well in making this multinational. He worked hard to get the United Nations and even the Arab League to oppose Saddam Hussein. He held off, you will remember, using force to enforce the embargo until he got the UN specifically to vote that again, even though he says he didn't think that was legal. All those things I think were good. So opposing the further aggression into Saudi Arabia, mobilizing a multinational force, those made sense. The mistake he has made, in my judgment, is, first of all, not giving sanctions a serious chance. The sanctions weren't really in effect until late September or October, or exactly when they finally got the mechanism in, I don't know. We do know of these sanctions that they are more widely supported than most in the world, but also that they're not leak-proof. It's virtually impossible to do that. No one who was supporting sanctions thought back in October that they would have worked by January. And I think the honest answer about the sanctions is no one knows what effect they are now having. But beyond that, and here is my fundamental problem with George Bush, he is apparently willing to continue a situation in which America, despite the fact that we are no longer the wealthiest nation by far in the world, despite the fact that our allies who once needed our protection are really not capable of an equal effort, he wants to continue the situation in which Americans do most of the spending, most of the dying, most of the bleeding, most of the paying. Because my fundamental problem with what we've got here is that while this was multinational up through the point of some of those UN votes, at this point we have an American war with some foreign cheerleaders. The United States is not getting, either financially or in terms of a contribution of fighting people, what we ought to expect from the rest of the world. And I think George Bush is making a mistake. I think he is too hasty in proposing to go to war. If force has to be used to liberate Kuwait, in my judgment, it should only be used if we can genuinely assemble a multinational force to do it. I don't think a multinational force describes American troops and foreign cheerleaders, and that's what we have today. So I supported the initial reaction, but I think at this point the president is moving ahead too quickly in too unilateral a fashion, and that is not fair to Americans, and it's not a good result.
We'll continue with Congressman Barney Frank live from Washington, D.C. Your telephone calls coming up as well. I'm Tom Leykis, 417. This is KFI-AM 640. And time now for a KFI Middle East news update from the KFI News Center. Here's Barbara Whitesides.
Thanks, Tom. Here's what's going on right now. France is proposing...
422, I'm Tom Leykis, live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. We are joined by Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts. The Detroit Free Press today, in an editorial, called for a draft. In their editorial, they said that the Selective Service claims they could deliver 100,000 men within 30 days to our military. Will we have a draft?
No. There is no need for one, and in fact, a draft would be irrelevant to the current war. The volunteer army has worked actually quite well, the volunteer armed services. If you began now, and I'm skeptical of the Selective Services claim that starting from scratch they could have 100,000 people delivered somewhere in 30 days, but even if they could do that in 30 days, as I said, I'm skeptical. People then have to be trained and shipped, and there would be no one, even the most pessimistic, thinks that a war between the United States and Iraq would last long enough for draftees to be a significant factor. I would also add that if we are in fact short of manpower, and I voted against going to war right now, and this is one of my points, the very notion that people are even suggesting that we've got to start drafting young Americans when no other nation in the world appears to be ready to participate to any significant degree in any hostilities other than the Saudi Arabians, whose territory we're defending. So it doesn't seem to me extraordinary that they would be trying to defend themselves. But this is still largely an American show. But if we ever did need more personnel, we still have, I don't know how many, 100,000 or more troops in Europe. We have 43,000 sitting in South Korea. We have troops all over the world, some of our best, most combat-ready, well-trained troops. If, in fact, there were a need, we would want to, I think, call them first. But in any case, the people who are advocating the draft, and I haven't read the Free Press editorial, but they're not talking about it from the military standpoint. They're talking about it from a social and political standpoint. That's what they are in effect saying is, we don't like the notion of war, or some of them are, and we feel a draft would increase resistance to it. Or they're saying the burden ought to be more clearly shared. But I think the social costs of a draft are too high. In my own view, where any society can accomplish a goal without coercion, then it ought to avoid coercion. Coercion is an evil. It's sometimes a necessary evil, but where you can accomplish a goal without coercion, then you ought to leave it out. And the volunteer military seems to be working well, and a draft is neither useful or necessary in this situation.
If we don't use a draft now, do you think it's basically dead?
I think it is in the foreseeable future. Now, maybe the world will change. We might come again to a situation, I certainly hope not, where we would have to do the kind of mobilization of millions of people to fight that we had to do in World War II. I mean, if you look at the percentage of the population, I don't know what that would come out to today. It would obviously be in the teens of millions. And if we ever needed a draft for that kind of a prolonged ground war, then obviously we would have to do it. But I can't foresee any military necessity for a draft in the foreseeable future.
Congressman, you've been saying that this war wouldn't last long enough to get draftees inducted and trained and what have you. Do you believe we'd win in very short order? And what would winning entail?
Oh, I didn't say that. All I said was that you wouldn't have draftees around in time, because I don't think you would have draftees available in less than a year. I do not think Iraq could sustain a war with the United States for a year. As to what the war would entail, I will give you what may be one of the few honest answers you're going to get on this subject in Washington. I don't know. Wars aren't neat. They don't fit patterns. They involve different people. I don't know what the morale of the Iraqi forces are. It held up pretty well against Iran, but I don't know what it would be in this situation. I don't know whether any of our allies would join in or not. I do know that Saddam Hussein has talked in his bellicose way of attacking Israel. Well, if he were to do that, that would shorten things even more. Obviously, if you had America and Israel both engaged against Iraq, Israel in clear self-defense, that would further undermine him. I don't know how long it would take or how many people would be killed, and I don't think people who tell you very confidently that they do know what they're talking about.
Well, I guess my question is not just what it would entail, but what would winning the war mean? Would it mean you assassinated Saddam Hussein? Would it mean you killed a certain number of thousands of people?
Well, I voted against the war over the weekend, so I'm probably not the best one to ask. I would think those who voted to go to war would object to one of us who voted not to setting the rules. I will say you raised, though, some very important questions about what this would mean. If you look at American policy, winning the war at this point means expelling the Iraqis from Kuwait. That's all. That's the goal. And in fact, if you look at George Bush's policy, winning means getting Iraq out of Kuwait even before a war. I know people have raised the question of the potential nuclear weapons that Iraq has or the chemical and biological weapons, but you have to look at the record of the Bush administration, and that makes me skeptical that that's involved here in anything except an afterthought for this reason. Saddam Hussein has had chemical and biological weapons for some time and has in fact used them against both Iran and his own people. He's been trying hard to build a nuclear weapon for this whole decade. The Bush administration, up until he invaded Kuwait, never seemed very unhappy about that. In fact, earlier, last year we're now talking, in 1990, during the agriculture bill, when some of us were trying to impose sanctions against Saddam Hussein because of his misuse of human rights and his use of chemical and biological warfare and his general tyrannical behavior, the Bush administration opposed it. President Bush and Secretary Baker sent Ambassador Glaspie to Saddam Hussein. I'm told that people ought to read the current Reader's Digest. There's an interesting article, how the West appeased Saddam Hussein and built him up. When the Voice of America was critical of Saddam Hussein, Secretary Baker had our ambassador apologize to him. So this is an administration that found nothing really to oppose previous to his invasion of Kuwait. And as they have defined this situation, both in what they have said would be needed to avoid a war and in what I take are the goals of the war from what he's told them, it's moving him out of Kuwait. And so victory, I guess, would be defined as getting him out of Kuwait. Now, one of the things that bothers me is that a war in which Saddam Hussein is defeated and he can portray this as America defeating Iraq will have some very destabilizing consequences in the Middle East. I have despaired. I had hoped that Saddam Hussein, whose thuggery brought us into this, and we ought to always remember this is the villain of the piece. We can disagree among ourselves here in America and elsewhere about how to deal with this thug. We should never lose sight of the fact that he's the man who began it. I had hoped he might want to pull out. He rebuffed Perez de Cuellar. I am now afraid that the model he's got in his mind, and this is just my own sense of it, is Gamal Abdel Nasser. In 1956, Nasser was engaged against the Israelis, who were fighting, I think, a war of self-defense against Egypt. Then the British and the French jumped in. Nasser lost, but he became a hero in losing. because he said to the population in the Arab world of the most anti-American sort, I stood up to them. And I am afraid that's what Saddam Hussein contemplates. And that's another reason, in addition to equity and our own self-interest, that I only want to see this happen if it is genuinely multinational. It is not only not in our interest to have Americans do a disproportionate share of the dying and the paying. I think politically, if Saddam Hussein can portray himself as having been defeated largely by America, that it will make it more difficult to put something together in that region afterwards.
I want to pursue this some more as we continue. We're talking with Massachusetts Congressman Barney Frank. Your telephone calls coming up in Los Angeles, toll-free, anywhere in Southern California, 1-800-553-4640, or anywhere else where you may be listening or watching on C-SPAN today. You can call us at area code 213-520-1534. That's area code 213-520-1-KFI. I'm Tom Leykis. It's 4:30 in Los Angeles at KFI-AM 640. Time now to go to the KFI News Center where Barbara Whitesides has the latest. Good afternoon, Barbara.
Well, good afternoon, Tom. Here's some of the stories we're talking about. There's now a French connection. France has unveiled the new...
4:35 before 5 o'clock. I'm Tom Leykis. This is KFI-AM 640. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. at the Hyatt Regency overlooking Capitol Hill. We'll be here at least through Wednesday of this week. We're also being seen on the C-SPAN cable television network across America, so you'll hear telephone calls from cities other than Southern Californian cities, and we welcome those telephone calls as well. Our telephone number again, in Southern California, anywhere in Southern California, toll-free, 1-800-553-4640. And anywhere else in America, area code 213-520-1534. We are joined this hour by Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts, a Democrat from the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts. And we were talking about Saddam Hussein and what winning the war, if there is a war, and we are just about assuming there is going to be one, what that would entail and what that would mean. Saddam Hussein, let's say that Saddam Hussein was flushed out of Kuwait, decided to either back out, pull out, or what have you. A number of the other issues that are being brought up are still going to exist. He's still trying to get his hands on nuclear weapons. He will still have chemical and biological weapons. He will still be doing all of the things for which he's being criticized now. So if we get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, have we won? Have we won anything?
Well, we have helped win freedom from the people of Kuwait. I always have to interject at this point. The tone of your question appears to make me the defender of the current policy.
No, not at all.
I'm not here. I think the Bush administration would join me in making clear that I am not here as their representative tonight.
I understand.
And as I said, I voted against the situation being one in which force is used right now. On the other hand, I would not denigrate the gains of getting Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And I understand Kuwait was hardly a democracy before he got in there. But I do think the Kuwaiti people were happier and better off under their own homegrown autocracy than they are under the heel of Saddam Hussein, who was one of the truly vilest people who, unfortunately, is running a country today. So we would gain something. But I also agree that the gains here are being overstated. And I would reiterate that the Bush administration, all during 1989 and up until August of 1990, essentially opposed criticism of Saddam Hussein as an official action, opposed sanctions. So on the question of chemical, biological weapons, which he's used, on the question of nuclear weapons, which he's trying to get, the policy of the Bush administration was not to give him any grief, as was the policy of the Reagan administration. Remember that the Israelis in 1981 attacked the Iraqi nuclear weapons facility. Had the Israelis not done that in 1981, Iraq would be closer today to nuclear weapons than they are. And the Reagan administration criticized Israel for doing it. So this administration and its predecessor can hardly be the ones to say, look, we have to do this because we have to get chemical, biological weapons and nuclear weapons away from this man. They, in fact, before he invaded Kuwait, were doing very little to deal with that, and in fact were opposing the efforts of some of us who wanted to put sanctions against Iraq on those grounds.
Let me tell you why I phrased the question that way. We are reading polls And the polls are different every day about how many Americans, what percentage of Americans support the use of force, and for how long, and how many casualties they would tolerate. I've never seen the same numbers twice.
Well, then I would stop reading them if I were you, and we could just talk about the substance. I'm serious. I think this is a particularly inapt time for daily poll watching. It's a very fluid situation. By the time people have been asked the question and the results are published, the situation's probably changed.
I'm leading up to something, though, here, and here's what I'm leading up to. It seems to me that Americans are not together on this issue, no matter what the numbers say. And part of the reason I think Americans are not together on this issue is because our foreign policy, and correct me if you disagree, our foreign policy doesn't seem to follow any particular moral objective, just whatever is expedient on that given week. We say we fight for democracy, yet here we are in Kuwait trying to put an emirate back in business. We say we fight for a particular reason, and then it changes the following year depending on...
Well, I would defend the Bush administration somewhat against your charge. I agree with you in part. In fact, one of the tragedies of the focus of this administration on Iraq is that we are being diverted from some other human rights issues. For instance, when the Chinese brutally repressed their own people in Tiananmen Square and have continued that repression and are, as we speak, are putting people on trial for trying to exercise the most basic freedoms, the Bush administration has rewarded them. They went through the motions of penalizing them. Last year, because George Bush needed China's vote on the Security Council, he extended to the Chinese trade benefits. The Chinese are not a free trade type of a country. They're not welcoming American goods. They are using that to export to the United States without being willing to give us reciprocity. And George Bush has had to be extremely nice to the Chinese, to the point where the American ambassador to China denounced Chinese protesters in this country. I was appalled at that. The Bush response to the Russian brutality in Lithuania is very tepid and very timid. If Jimmy Carter, as president, had ever reacted as tepidly as George Bush is reacting to what the Russians are now doing in Lithuania, some of my most conservative friends would have been apoplectic, and justly so. So I will agree with you that in his focus, almost to the exclusion of everything else on Saddam Hussein, George Bush is unfortunately letting slip what ought to be a fight for American principles elsewhere.
Let's take some telephone calls here. We'll start with Pat in Newbury Park, California. You're on KFI. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, Pat.
Mr. Frank, I'd like to know if you think that the vote in the Congress, you think it would have been different if he'd have come to you before he went to the UN, before he put offensive forces in the Gulf?
Not much. The UN, I think many of us, even those who voted against him, give him credit for working with the UN. On the other hand, some of my colleagues, ironically, some of my very conservative colleagues who have been the most contemptuous of the UN suddenly became great converts to its virtue and were insisting almost that we had to do this because we owed it to the UN. Since it was largely America who persuaded the UN to do this, I don't think the other members of the UN would have been too upset if we hadn't immediately gone to force. But I think most people voted based on their own estimate of the situation. It was a very difficult set of calculations for people, but I don't think the timing affected the actual votes.
Thank you for the call, Pat. We'll continue more of your telephone calls coming up from Massachusetts Congressman Barney Frank. Stay tuned. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. at the Hyatt Regency overlooking Capitol Hill. Joining us after the news at 5 will be Republican Congressman Bob Dornan. It's 4:43 now in Los Angeles, 17 before 5 o'clock. My name is Tom Leykis. You're listening to KFI-AM 640. 4:46, 14 now before 5 o'clock. Tom Leykis live from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640, and we are talking with Democratic Congressman Barney Frank on the subject of Lithuania and the activities there yesterday, the killings, the bloodshed, and what have you. We have heard that the people who surround Mikhail Gorbachev say that he did not order the soldiers to fire upon Lithuanian citizens. Do you believe that?
I don't have any reason to disbelieve specifically that he gave the order. On the other hand, there are ways to turn away, having created a situation in which you can expect certain results. It is certainly the case that Mikhail Gorbachev does not appear to be working night and day to undo that situation. So I can believe that the particular shooting happened not, I would say, without his authorization, but before his authorization. But that really isn't too much of a difference to us. He was clearly moving in that direction. He is not undoing the situation. If you really believe that the soldiers were firing without authorization, I would expect some discipline. I don't expect that they'd go to prison in that situation, but is somebody being demoted? Is somebody being transferred? I don't see that. I think it is a case of the Russians taking advantage of not the fact that George Bush is distracted, because from their standpoint it's even better than his being distracted. He needs them. George Bush, I think, has made a mistake. He is giving the rest of the world the impression that they are doing us a favor by letting us do all this fighting and paying in Iraq. The Egyptians got a $7 billion cancellation of their debt. The Chinese, as bad on human rights as it's possible to be, what the Chinese have done in Tibet is an accomplished fact. What is in Saddam Hussein's mind only a hope in Kuwait. What Saddam Hussein hopes to do to Kuwait, the Chinese have already done to Tibet, and they continue to reinforce that. George Bush rewards them with most favored nation treatment. The Soviets, for their support, we've established some trade concessions for them, which I supported at the time because they had been good on the immigration issue, but now we're doing virtually nothing as they do this. Unfortunately, one of the problems that George Bush is not dealing with is what price do we pay for this. We're paying a terrible price in our foreign policy because it becomes the leverage that every other country has over us. We're paying a big price domestically. By the way, people should realize that according to the Bush administration, every single dollar that we saved last year with all of the sweat and toil and the budget reduction agreement, every single dollar that we cut from spending...
Tax increases, we should remember.
Well, I'm talking now only about the deficits that were saved in terms of total dollars. But you may be right. The tax increase may be involved. Whatever we did in terms of cutting spending and probably raising taxes to reduce this year's deficit is being undone by Desert Shield. Desert Shield will cost the American taxpayers, according to the Bush administration, more than we saved last year. And where are the Japanese? Where are the Germans? Where are the French and the Danes and the Belgians? Where are the Kuwaitis and the other Gulf states? Unfortunately, they figured George Bush out. They figured that he is so eager to take this on that they can really hang back and let America do it all. I sometimes think, and not only do we do it all, but we act as if everybody else has done us a favor by letting us do it all. I believe that the most popular book in the world is clearly Tom Sawyer, because every other country in the world has figured out how to get America to paint its fence. And not only do we paint their fences, but we thank them for letting us do it.
We speak about President Bush domestically. Time magazine named President Bush the Man of the Year as a critique of his domestic policy as opposed to his foreign policy. Let's talk about your part of the woods. The Bank of New England, the third largest bank failure in American history. The economy looks none too good. In fact, they keep saying that the recession is the only thing pulling us out of inflation right now. How do you rate President Bush's performance domestically?
It's been very discouraging. There were a couple of areas where he's done well. His collaboration with Congress in getting a Clean Air Act, I admire, and I give him credit for that. He reversed the Reagan policy so that we were able to deal with the environment. Ronald Reagan refused to. But there have been very few other areas where the president has done well domestically, and in fact, we are paying a high price for his international focus. And energy is one example. Oil prices went up without any real justification. There was no diminution in the supply anywhere near proportional to the price increase. We are sitting on a vast strategic petroleum reserve. George Bush could have, by announcing that he planned to use that strategic petroleum reserve, prevented much of that oil price increase, but he didn't choose to do that.
With Congressman Barney Frank live from Washington, D.C., Tom Leykis on KFI-AM 640. Let's take Peter from San Diego at 451. Hi, Peter. You're on KFI.
Hi, Tom. The show looks good on C-SPAN, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks to them.
Frank, I have a question for you, sir, based on my concern that about what this war will do to our country and its institutions in addition to the carnage it's going to cause. I see a disturbing trend illustrated by Bush last week actually invoking a state of national emergency. And I understand that this gives him unprecedented unilateral powers, including the power to suspend certain provisions of the Bill of Rights. Do you think this national emergency was justified, and do these kinds of domestic developments and trends concern you and your colleagues?
Yes, I must say, I don't know what specific references you have, but I don't believe that statutorily you can suspend the Bill of Rights, and I don't believe that the Bill of Rights is suspended, nor, in fairness to the President, do I see any indication that he's planning to do that. In fact, people have asked why Congress didn't just do a flat-out declaration of war. Why did we vote on an authorization to use force? And part of the reason is the very concern that you raised, because the question is essentially a sound one. Given that the last full-blown war we had was World War II, a time of very dire national emergency, we passed a lot of statutes then, and then less justifiably in the Cold War period afterwards, which give the President really enormous unilateral powers in time of a formal declaration of war, far more than is healthy, than is necessary, than is even useful for fighting. And by not declaring war, by simply authorizing the use of force, we avoided most of those. In fact, I would say, if you look at this historically, I wouldn't worry too much about negative consequences there. This war, if we have it, and I hope we don't, I hope the President still withholds, but if he goes forward, it will be after a very thorough democratic debate and the closest votes in the history of the United States on whether or not the United States should go into a military action. The War of 1812 is the next most divided, and these votes were much closer. So I think we have given the world, and obviously I was disappointed in the result. I was on the losing side on the vote on the key resolution about using force. But I think we've given the world a pretty good example of how democracy functions, and many of us are going to continue to insist on that.
Thank you for the call, Peter. We'll continue with our final moments with Congressman Barney Frank, and any more calls we can squeeze in, we will do that. Stay tuned. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. I'm Tom Leykis. 4:54, 6 now before 5 o'clock here at KFI-AM 640. Time now to go to Mike Nolan, KFI in the Sky. Good afternoon, Mike.
Tom, good afternoon.
4:58 at KFI-AM 640. We're live from Washington, D.C. John in Los Angeles. You're on with Congressman Barney Frank. Hello. John. All right, John went away. Let's wrap this up because we only have about a minute here left.
Can I just say one thing that I should have said before?
Yes.
There was one thing in the area of people's freedom and civil liberties that bothered me, and that was the FBI's, I think, excessively aggressive approach to Arab Americans. Obviously, the FBI has a duty to protect all Americans, including Arab Americans, against any threats. But apparently, the FBI also thought that they would make a generalized approach to Arab Americans to question them about what they might know about terrorism. I think that was a mistake. The last thing we should be doing is in any way encouraging prejudice towards any group of Americans. I share the unhappiness of a lot of Arab Americans about that, and I hope the FBI will just discontinue that practice.
Do you foresee any way we could ever go back to the insane policy of internment or something like that?
No, it was my subcommittee that I chaired, the Administrative Law Subcommittee Judiciary, that brought out the bill to compensate the Japanese Americans and to apologize to them. And I can tell you that the Congress understood how terribly misguided a policy that was. And even those who voted no were voting no on the compensation payment, although I disagreed with them. But there was unanimity, virtual unanimity, that this was one of the worst mistakes America as a government ever made. And I believe that through the suffering of our Japanese American fellow citizens, we have learned a terrible lesson that will never be repeated.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's Congressman Barney Frank from Massachusetts. Coming up on our next hour, Kuwaiti Ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Fabakh, will join us, as well as Congressman Bob Dornan, the Republican from Orange County. Stay tuned. There's more to come live from Washington, D.C. I'm Tom Leykis. It's 5 o'clock at KFI Los Angeles. More stimulating talk radio.
The golf countdown.
Coming back. 5:07 in Los Angeles. Thank you for tuning into KFI AM 640. My name is Tom Leykis. This is where we talk about the issues Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 in the afternoon as you head home. The Joe Crummy Show tonight at 7 o'clock here on KFI. Dr. Laura Schlesinger at 10. And the Larry King Show at 1 a.m. That's our lineup tonight here on the KFI AM 640. And I got to tell you something. We are broadcasting live from Washington, D.C. at the beautiful Hyatt Regency Hotel overlooking Capitol Hill. And we will be here at least through Wednesday of this week. We also welcome all the people who are watching on C-SPAN, the cable television network. We've been getting calls from across America today. If that sounds strange, it's not because our radio program has become a syndicated or a network show, it's because for today we have cameras in with us here at the Hyatt Regency in Washington, and we are being observed every move we make, including during the commercials. I shouldn't tell you this because now you'll turn on the TV to find out what we are saying during the commercials, but I guess that's a secret between us and however many millions of people are watching right now. We are here with our producers, Eric Braverman and Greg Cockrell. They're here. Greg is running the board, and Eric is running around getting all our guests, running around in the limousine. We'll have, in our final hour today, former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. He'll be joining us 1 hour from right now, and you'll have a chance to join in on all of our conversation. So stay with us this afternoon. Joining me right now here at the Grand Canyon Room of the Hyatt Regency is Congressman Bob Dornan from the 38th District, Orange County, Republican Congressman. And Bob, you are not only here with me today, you're also filling in on the Rush Limbaugh show. I heard you when I was in a cab in New York City today. How you doing?
Oh, my gosh. And I did Larry King the night, the eve before the big votes in the House. Said Jim Bohannon. Never got a chance to work that close with Jim before.
Well, what do you want to do? You want to be a congressman? You want to be a talk show host? What's the story here?
Well, I'll tell you. I'm not about to give up Congress. And in spite of what happens with the Senate in California, I'm running in 92 for something. So I'll probably be returning to Orange County the way the options are closing in on the open Cranston seat and the other seat. But there's no doubt in my mind that somewhere within me is that newsman, that Joel McRae, trench coat foreign correspondent, because although I just returned from the Gulf a few weeks ago, as we get closer to this moment of terrible decision for President Bush, I wish I were back over in the Gulf with young guys and gals. It's just a feeling that can't be described. Well, ask Bob Hope, who's still doing it at 85 years of age. And all of us hope that none of them will have to be called to lay their lives on the line. But as I said on the show today, you probably heard me, I've been an optimist for 5 months and 12 days. Right until today, I've said this will not happen. It can't happen. The man is, Saddam Hussein is not this dumb. There's a clever desert fox in him, or as they'd say on Saturday Night Live, the jackal of the desert. But what scared me today was de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the UN, saying he has a serenity about him, a fatalism, and it reminded me of the many books I've written about Adolf Hitler's demeanor in the bunker, calm, hunched over, all torn up from being overprescribed by pills and tranquilizers by his doctors, but talking about secret weapons and about the things that he'd accomplished for Europe. And that serenity of the bunker seems to have overcome Saddam Hussein. So I'm afraid he's hunkered down, and we'll probably have to drive him out.
I must tell you, I arrived here in D.C. This afternoon, and one of the issues that I've been concerned about, and we've been getting calls about, is if war breaks out, and it does seem that there'll be some kind of military action at some point in time. When that is, we just don't know. I must say, a lot of people are concerned about security. And here in Washington, D.C., I must tell you, I have seen nothing but jittery people at the airport. People are checking everybody out a little more closely. The airport in New York City, people were very jittery. And I was watching the newscasts here in Washington, the local television newscasts earlier this evening. And it seemed to me that that is the question on everybody's mind. Is this city particularly vulnerable to any kind of terrorism?
Well, not only is it vulnerable, the Washington, D.C. area has been described from the terrorist viewpoint as the most target-rich area in the world. So target-rich and so easy to inflict damage upon people and property that I don't think it would be wise for me to describe just how easy, because although terrorists are professionals who work at this all day long and stay up all night long thinking of ways to bring mayhem and torture and killing and bombings to people, women and children not excluded, but who knows, there may be something that they haven't yet thought of. But suffice it to say, every senator, every congressman, everybody but the president, the vice president, the cabinet, can be had at just about any time. Easily. That's how bad it is.
Are we capable of handling a threat like that?
The FBI is trying to keep track of all the Iraqi students in the country. Now, first of all, let me say up front, so we don't get into some kind of hysteria that leads to the shameful horror that even a great president like Franklin Roosevelt contributed to, the Manzanar camps, the locking up of loyal Japanese Americans. The FBI would not be doing its job if it didn't try to find out where all the Iraqi students are, particularly the 1,500 or so who are way over on their student visas who are here illegally. Some of them, described by another student to one of my sons this very day, and this is a nice kid who's the son of a minister and expects his dad to die and the whole country to be torn apart, and says, but we're going to tear a lot of American planes out of the sky in the process, and he's very much living the good life here. But he did say to my son, well, there are many hundreds of Iraqi students who have disappeared into the system, is the way he put it, and they probably will be performing random acts of terrorism. That's a whole separate category. You know what the FBI calls it? The individual call from Allah. Now, for example, the guy that gunned down Rabbi Kahani in the streets of New York, he had almost been electrocuted to death a few years ago. I mean, the massive amount that you can sustain and not die. And I said to the FBI, well, was that a direct call from God, like The Flash on television? But whether that man's illness was brought about by that or not, he moved individually, the voice from Allah type approach. And that's going to happen all over the world. Meanwhile, the Iraqi intelligence service and their diplomatic service has broken every law of decency, everything from the diplomatic pouch to how they operate their embassies. Remember, it was from the Iraqi embassy that they fired and killed a young female Bobby, a British police officer. And that man was never brought to justice. Eventually, all those people got out of that embassy and went home. So there isn't anything they won't do in the field of terrorism, all in a phony way under the name of God, to bring havoc to this country, but particularly to Europe and the Mediterranean area.
We'll continue our conversation with Congressman Bob Dornan, and we'll be joined after the break by the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. You want to stay tuned. My name is Tom Leykis. It's 5:15. This is KFI-AM 640. Time now for a KFI Middle East news update from the KFI News Center. Here's Barbara Whitesides.
Thanks, Tom. Here's what's going on right now. President Bush says Saddam Hussein...
Hi there.
How are you? See you.
Very good, Tom Leykis. 5:20, Tom Leykis, live over KFI-AM 640. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. We are here on KFI from Washington, D.C. We're at the Hyatt Regency overlooking Capitol Hill. We're also being seen this afternoon on the cable television network C-SPAN. Our final hour today, we'll have former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. That hour will not be seen live on C-SPAN. If you're watching on C-SPAN, you will still be able to call in on KFI. But that hour is going to be taped for a later broadcast on C-SPAN, so you can make your plans accordingly. Those of you listening in Los Angeles on KFI, or those of you watching on TV who are in the Southern California area can listen on KFI-AM 640. We're here with Congressman Bob Dornan, Republican from the 38th District of Orange County in California. And joining us now is the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Sabah. And I welcome you to the program today. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk with you. Of course, Congressman Dornan is in on this conversation as well. Let's talk a little bit right now about what your job entails at a very delicate time like this.
I think my job entails a lot at this stage because we are extremely concerned with what's going to happen in the next deadline on the 15th of January, in the next 24 hours practically. And thereafter, I think let me say quite frankly, I mean, I'm extremely relieved that we have the Congress who voted on this very crucial and important subject, which is in a confrontation with Iraq. And I think that's a very strong signal to send to the Iraqis that the people of the United States have stood behind their president in this policy. And I hope that this signal will somehow convince Saddam Hussein that he can no longer play around with the idea or the ploy that there is a division or discontent inside the United States with the policy of the president. And I believe that's a very positive step, and that's a great relief as you mentioned, to my job in this country, and I hope now we can get on the proper tracks.
What has been the cost to your country so far in terms of human life, financial costs, what have you?
Well, the costs are extensive, Tom. First of all, human lives. We have lost a lot, thousands during the invasion and after the invasion, with the mass executions by the Iraqis, the violence that's taking place, their atrocities, their brutalities against my people. But you must also realize that our concern with regard to the infrastructure of the country is not as great as our concern to the well-being of the people who are inside. We were, of course, extremely concerned with the presence of many Americans and others who were hiding in Kuwait and as hostages. That, again, has been a relief from our conscience to get them out of the country and to be safe with their families and their loved ones. The extent of the damage to the country we don't really yet know, because, as you realize that Saddam Hussein has never allowed any foreign correspondent or reporter to go into Kuwait to report to the world what he is doing inside the country to the people and to the country itself in looting and pillaging and practically stealing and robbing the whole country.
Do we have any idea what's going on? Have we received reports?
We have very sketchy reports coming out, but with regard to the extent of destruction to the infrastructure. But again, the problem is that we don't have human organizations that have been allowed in to care for the people. But you see, we're hearing the cries from the people who are inside. I do have certain contacts with Kuwait, twice a week or so, and in a very clandestine way. And they're briefing me on exactly what's happening and trying to find out the extent of loss of life and damage. But again, they are people who are in distress. They don't have any medical supplies. There are no hospitals. We had in Kuwait 10 modern hospitals in Kuwait. Now only one is running, caring for the Iraqi soldiers. The rest are closed down. All the equipments have been stolen by the Iraqis. All the medical supplies have been stolen. So the Kuwaitis and other innocent civilians who are inside Kuwait do not get the medical care that, as human beings, they should. And again, the food stuff in the country is running short. So what we're talking about actually here is not just a real state or a part of a territory. We're talking about humans who are under siege and who are actually hostages of Saddam Hussein now for the last 5.5 months.
Tom, I've seen some of the fruits of the ambassador's labor up at Fort Dix yesterday. The ambassador and I have worked together and known one of them now since August, shortly after the invasion. I'd met his sons who brought up on Capitol Hill. I took him to a meeting with many conservative congressmen with his son, and you coordinated this call to all of the Kuwaiti students throughout the country, many of them PhDs, some in their 30s and 40s, to come to their aid of their country. So yesterday I flew in an Air Force airplane with 3 other congressmen up to Fort Dix in New Jersey for the final day of their training. They were qualifying out on the gunnery range with M16s, hand-picked a group that'll be senior officers qualified later with the Beretta 9mm pistol. And these doctors, dentists, students, PhDs, master's degrees from the early 20s, as I said, right up in the 40s, 297 of them will be leaving the country when? Tomorrow?
They left already.
They left?
I just came back from them. I just saw them off now, and I must excuse myself for being late because I just got into town from New Jersey and to see them off from Fort Dix. And
well, it must have been stirring when you put out this call. They came here, I understand, first to Washington, and then you put them on buses up to Fort Dix in New Jersey.
Oh, yes. They've been volunteering since the beginning of the invasion, and we've been trying to coordinate this with the U.S. government, trying to find camps for them to train in the U.S., to join the U.S. forces. And I'm proud that and glad that we're able to manage to do this, and we've done it, and now they finished training. They're on their way now back to the front. Also, we have many camps in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries taking in all volunteers and recruits for the purpose of training. We have accomplished a big stage in this line, and we've got now thousands who are in the front, and this special unit that's been trained here with the U.S. forces is going to serve a special task force with the U.S. forces in the area. So I'm proud.
Your Army attaché is Colonel Dahoud?
That's right.
Yeah, I had lunch with him yesterday, and he's very proud of him, too. And we can't say everything they'll be doing, but one of the principal jobs will be as translators and also as analysts with all the units in the field, correct?
They are expected to do whatever they are ordered to do, and amongst them, whatever, special kind of things to do with the U.S. Army. And I sensed spoke to them today, and I had lunch with them today together there, and we talked, and I sensed this sense of go and get them. This kind of sense there, and as you said, Bob, there are many of them are PhDs and masters and left colleges, and they want to go, and we have a large number of them still in the U.S., also waiting their turn for training camps to go through here, or we're going to fly them to the area there to be trained instantly on site.
The bottom line, Tom, is it was a lump in the throat experience to see them all cheer in American uniforms, free Kuwait. And we don't know how many of them will give their lives, but every one of them was certainly willing to.
Well, speaking of giving lives, certainly what has been lost in Kuwait already will pale in comparison to what will happen should war begin. Are you concerned? Are the people in your country and the people who have fled your country who would love to go back, are you looking forward to the opportunity to defend the existence of your country and the emirate? Are you concerned about the losses that are going to come?
Every human being, Tom, is concerned with what kind of loss we're going to see if heaven forbids, there is a military conflict taking place. I mean, no one wants to see war, no one wants to see violence, no one wants to see any further bloodshed in the area. But this question, I think, is difficult for me to answer because we want to liberate the country. And the whole thing is the process of freedom and liberation. And whatever cost that will incur on my country, I think we have to pay the price. We have already paid a high price now, and we have to pay even higher price for the purpose of freedom and liberation. But let's hope that, as the President has repeatedly said, that the decision is with Saddam Hussein. It's not with President Bush, it's not with anybody else. The decision is with Saddam Hussein. If he wants a peaceful solution before this deadline, then all he has to do is to implement the Security Council resolutions or face the consequences. I believe the whole world here stands holding their breath, waiting to what this man intends to do in destruction in human lives and property.
We'll take a break. We will continue with our guests with us here at the Hyatt Regency in Washington, D.C. We have Congressman Bob Dornan, the Republican from the 38th District, Orange County, California. Also with us, Kuwaiti Ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Sabah. And your telephone calls coming up. Anywhere in Southern California, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-553-4640. Again, anywhere in Southern California, toll-free, 1-800-553-4640. Anywhere else, whether you're listening in Southern California or watching us on C-SPAN anywhere across the country, you just call us at area code 213-520-1534. That's 213-520-1KFI. My name is Tom Leykis. We're live in Los Angeles from Washington, D.C. over KFI-AM 640. And time now to go to the KFI News Center where Barbara Whitesides has the latest. Barbara?
Good afternoon, Tom. Here's what's going on.
5:34:26 now, before 6 o'clock. My name is Tom Leykis, and this is KFI-AM 640. This is where we discuss the issues Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 in the afternoon as you head home. And this week we are broadcasting from Washington, D.C. We're at the Hyatt Regency Hotel overlooking Capitol Hill. Joining me in studio, Congressman Bob Dornan from the 38th District in Orange County, Republican. And, of course, if you're watching on C-SPAN, it's Orange County, California, as opposed to Orange County, Florida, or any other orange counties there may be. Also with us, Kuwaiti Ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Sabah. And we're continuing our conversation about the situation we are all concerned about in the Persian Gulf. Bob, you were going to bring up an issue that...
Well, for the C-SPAN audience, they heard me ask the long version of the question of the ambassador, and he didn't get a chance to respond yet. But for anybody who watched Marlo Thomas do an excellent job last night, and you're going to have Sis Levin and Jerry Levin.
Jerry Levin, right.
Jerry was the first American taken hostage on this cycle back in '84, and a year later he escaped. And supposedly he was not going to be released, or Terry Anderson, who's still there, or Tom Sutherland. Bill Buckley was beaten and tortured to death over a 2-year period, the CIA station chief there. All of these early American prisoners of the terrorist war, the group said will not release them until our brothers, terrorist bombers, held prisoner in Kuwait, when Kuwait was free, until those 17 people are released. Now, when Saddam Hussein overran and raped your country, what happened to those 17 prisoners? And if they've been released, why don't the Syrians, who now control all of Lebanon, make sure that our prisoners are Tom Sutherland, Scipio, Tracy, the others, and particularly Terry Anderson, who begins his 7th year in captivity March 16th. Why aren't they released? And what happened to those 17 prisoners?
Bob, I don't believe that for a bit all the past years when the hijacking of Kuwaiti Airlines that took place, they were demanding the release of those 17 prisoners in Kuwait, who, by the way, we tried and convicted in a court of law for bombing the U.S. Embassy and the French and other Kuwaiti installations.
And killing people.
And killing people, of course. And we didn't believe for a moment that this was their original demand. But let's draw the line here. Those terrorists that we arrested in Kuwait that did the terrorist acts, they were somehow not related with Iraq. They're anti-Iraqi activists. They're called the Dawa Group, who are more sympathetic with the Iranian regime rather than the Iraqi regime. And this has been the demand of the terrorist group in Lebanon, that we release them, and we have repeatedly refused to release them or to succumb to any pressure to give in to terror and terrorists. So in response to your question, Bob, I don't really know where they are. I mean, I believe some of them escaped the prison after the invasion, and some of them have been captured by the Iraqis, because the Iraqis do want them, because they are anti-Iraqi regime movement.
They're pro-Syrian, pro-Iranian?
They're pro-Iranian. They're pro-Iranian.
What a mix.
Anti-Iraqi. And I believe the Iraqis wanted to get their hands on them. And to my knowledge, I received some information and reports that some of them have, even when they came out or escaped the prison, joined our resistance movement inside Kuwait in order to safeguard their own self from the Iraqi hands.
And there's a rumor the Iraqis may have executed some of them that they did capture.
There are rumors, but you see, the problem is that we don't really have the proper information on this yet.
Let's take some telephone calls. Laura in Vero Beach, Florida. You're on KFI. Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Okay, I have two questions. First of all, have all of Iraq's assets been frozen worldwide?
Yes, but there are over 100 countries in the coalition supporting the sanctions, and there are 28 countries that have sent troops, including little Honduras, for example, has sent 100 soldiers. A German Luftwaffe squadron is now in Turkey. That's the first time the Luftwaffe has posted a squadron overseas since the Russian front in World War II. And all of these nations participating, of course, have frozen any assets, and it's billions of dollars. I defer to the ambassador on this, but if Iraq had not invaded Iran and cost 500,000 lives, and squandered all their petrodollars, a lot of them from the United States, but most from Europe and Japan, they would be as beautiful a country as Kuwait once was and will be again, as beautiful a country as Saudi Arabia is. I couldn't believe the buildings, the hotels, the industry in Saudi Arabia since I was last there just 5 or 6 years ago. It is amazing. But Saddam Hussein squandered all of this because, after all, he did have 1 out of every 10 barrels of oil in the world, as Kuwait does. And by taking Kuwait, he had 20% of the world's oil. If he'd taken Saudi Arabia, he'd had 45 to 50% of the world's oil. So what did he do with all of his oil? And he squandered it killing people, and then he looks at Kuwait, and with raw greed and jealousy, or as he said yesterday to the impoverished Iraqi people, you own Kuwait, I've given it to you. Sad what he's done with his money.
Laura, thank you for the call. Nick in Des Moines, Iowa. You're on KFI at 540. Hello.
Yes, good evening. First of all, I'd like to say hello to all the panelists, and I'd like to give my sympathy to the ambassador of Kuwait and the people of Kuwait. And I have a question, sir. After this problem is resolved, either by peace or militarily, and the true government of Kuwait is back, will the people of Kuwait establish a true democratic government rather than a monarchy?
Well, thank you for your kind words to start with regard to your sympathy with our plight here. You know, we do have a constitutional system in Kuwait since 1963. We do have a constitution and a parliament, a pre-elected parliament. You know, some people seem to associate that if you do have a semi-monarchy system, then you do not have thereby any kind of democracy or any kind of freedom of speech and etc. You know, let's look at similar systems that are much closer to ours. Let's leave the United States aside now here, which is, I don't think it's unique around the world. Let's look at the British, let's look at many other European countries who have monarchs and who have a constitutional system. The system in Kuwait has been chosen by the Kuwaiti people by a freely elected parliament in 1963, where it instated the Kuwaiti constitution. And there are a separation of powers between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executives. Yeah. So the powers are divided, and every Kuwaiti participated in drawing up our constitution, which is befitting to our customs and to our tradition and to our religion. So the talk about democracy, we've had democracy, my friend, for years. One of the reasons I believe, you know, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and destroyed Kuwait, amongst other reasons, is to destroy the democratic life in Kuwait, because he saw a democracy in Kuwait flourishing that will threaten his own regime, where a regime of dictatorship, and that will lead his people to ask questions: why is this freedom in Kuwait and democracy in Kuwait, why we don't have it in Iraq? You know, there used to be known that there were two democracies in the Middle East. Now I'm saying relative democracies if you're making any relevance to the United States system. There were two democracies, one Lebanon, which was destroyed, and Kuwait, which is now being virtually destroyed. But hopefully things will be back to normal. I mean, I can't understand when we were flourishing, we had a very vibrant parliament in Kuwait, when we had all the freedom of press in Kuwait and all this and that. People didn't really pay attention to that movement taking inside Kuwait. Only now, when the country is invaded and destroyed, and the Iraqi propaganda has been infiltrated to many medias around the world, that to expose the system we had in Kuwait as being a lack of democracy. You know, we're proud to say we don't have even one single political prisoner in Kuwait. There's a proper judiciary system. There is freedom of press. We have 6 daily papers which operate freely, other than the weekly ones. I mean, these are the freedoms we have enjoyed all along. And this, I think, is a testimony of the fact that when Saddam invaded Kuwait, he wasn't able to find a single Kuwaiti to collaborate with him. The Kuwaitis stood together behind their government because this is the system they chose for themselves. This is the system of their choice, and they are satisfied with it. And they cannot find a better one, quite frankly, in the whole area.
Nick, I thank you for the call. We'll continue our conversation live from Washington, D.C. I'm Tom Leykis. It's 5:44, 16 now, before 6 o'clock, over KFI-AM 640. 5:48, 12 now, before 6 o'clock. I'm Tom Leykis, live from Washington, D.C., over KFI-AM 640. We are with you live Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 in the afternoon as you head home. It'll be Joe Crummy live from Los Angeles tonight at 7, Dr. Laura Schlesinger at 10, and the Larry King Show at 1 a.m. Coming up in our final hour, we'll be joined by former Washington, D.C. Marion Barry. That hour will not be seen live on C-SPAN. It will be recorded for later broadcast. So if you're watching anywhere in Southern California and you'd like to listen to that last hour, you can over KFI. And, of course, you are welcome to call in whether you're watching or listening or not. So stay with us for our final hour tonight. Tomorrow on the program, we'll be joined by peace activist Daniel Ellsberg, Jerry Levin, who you may have seen his life fictionalized last night in the ABC television movie that starred Marlo Thomas. He'll be with us tomorrow. And we'll be joined also by California's newest junior senator, John Seymour. It's all coming up tomorrow, live from Washington over KFI-AM 640. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are here with Congressman Bob Dornan of Orange County, California. Also, Kuwaiti Ambassador to the United States, Saud Nasir Al-Sabah, is with us. And we continue with your telephone calls. Let's say hello here to Roger in Defiance, Iowa. You're on KFI. Hello.
Hi, this is Roger from Defiance, Ohio. My question is this.
if indeed we do have to go to war, which none of us want, but it seems that it's important to go in and to take the situation over, my question is primarily to the congressman and also to the ambassador. If indeed we do go to war, and of course we will win, we will prevail, we understand that because of the superiority of our forces. Once the war is over, what do you both perceive as the need for the U.S. presence there in Kuwait and perhaps even in Iraq?
Well, let me go out on a limb, and then you tell me what you think is good for the Arab world. I see no need for the U.S. Military or any of the other 27 allies to hold Iraqi territory, to set up military governorships in Baghdad and Basra the way we did in occupied Germany, or the way General MacArthur brought democracy to Japan, what he considered his greatest achievement. I see air power destroying the entire war-making capability of Saddam's war machine, including what's now called NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical, and hopefully not having to go far enough to break up the dams and to black out the country electrically to destroy their whole electrical grid. I see it as an Arab problem, and so I pass the ball to you. Who will reestablish order, and is there another party besides the Ba'ath Party to bring order to the country after we've taken out the Saddam Hussein regime?
Bob, I would agree with you, but the point I think Roger is referring to also is what kind of a future security arrangement for the area. And I would respond to that by saying it will all depend on the eventual outcome of this whole crisis, how would this, whether it be resolved by peace or by military means. If it is resolved peacefully, then we have to be concerned with the, as you said, the chemical and biological and nuclear weapons that Saddam Hussein might have in the future, and the threat he poses to all nations in the region. And if it is resolved militarily, then I think it's understandably that there's a lot of destruction going to be inflicted upon the Iraq military capability. What will happen eventually, then some kind of a security arrangement between us, our friends in the Gulf, other Arab allies and friends around the world, will have to work out some kind of measures or system where we would have some kind of presence for security for the future until things can be resolved in a proper way, because we're going to see a time of turbulence for the next months or so after this crisis is resolved.
Tom, may I piggyback on Roger's question? Suppose he does pull out, which we're all hoping for at the last minute, pulls out, gives Kuwait back, raped, stripped, but the infrastructure's still there, the oil's there, the plumbing's there. Will you ask American occupation troops to come in, not occupation troops, friendly troops, to reinforce your northern border against Iraq? And with the holy days coming, the Ramadan and the Hajj, how can you do that?
I believe that Ramadan and Hajj has nothing to do with it. This is really the Iraqi propaganda again with regard to the Ramadan, the Hajj. We're concerned here with the security of our people, our nations, and every nation that has sent forces to our aid. As far as we are concerned, they are our friends and they are our allies. And if Saddam pulls out from Kuwait peacefully, we do need some security arrangements, whether it's with the United States or with any other nation who's willing to be part of that security arrangement that we're looking for.
I want to ask the same question, Bob, that I asked Barney Frank in the last hour, though. We talk about the war that is inevitably going to come, and we know we're going now. There's no question in my mind that Saddam Hussein's not going to pull out by tomorrow night at midnight Eastern Time. The question is, what would winning the war consist of? For example, let's say Saddam Hussein pulls out of Kuwait and goes back within the Iraqi border. He's still, if he's Adolf Hitler, he's still Adolf Hitler.
That's right.
If he, he still has chemical and biological weapons. He's still trying to get nuclear technology. Have you won the war?
No. We're then in the situation we are with nuclear proliferation spreading around the world. I have a letter here from Judge Webster. 20 nations may have it by the year 2000. 6 already do, probably 8. I believe Israel has it, and South Africa.
What do you do, though? Assassinate all the world leaders who are trying to get their hands on nuclear technology?
No, we're back to that fragile situation where we handle him the way we're trying to handle other countries that have nuclear weapons, to get them all to sign sanity agreements, I guess, in Geneva, that they will will contain themselves, start destroying weapons, and implement some UN force that says nobody else will get them. That would include him because he doesn't have them yet. And then maybe a UN aerial force will take out the next Osirak reactor instead of leaving it to a nation of only 3 million people, Israel, which drives the whole Arab world angry.
You know, I believe, Tom, if I just could follow up here, it's important to realize that many nations now are unanimous on a decision that even if he does withdraw, there are compensations, reparations for the Kuwaitis and for the country itself and for others who've lost all their properties against Iraq. So we're not just going to stay there. We're going to look for war crimes. Also, the Security Council resolution with regard to compensation, reparations, war crimes, etc., and so on. And some measures that will be imposed on Iraq with regard to inspections and the relieving them from the possession of the chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. You know, this is a tremendous situation and a crisis we're facing, because when you talk about nations that have nuclear capability, nations who have this nuclear capability have it for a deterrence and a defensive nature, rather to use it at will, like the Iraqis have done so, as a means of aggression against neighbors. When they used it against Iran, they used it against their own people in Iraq, and probably they will use it against Kuwait. So what we're looking for here, nations who do have it, are responsible nations who have not used it. Israel has the nuclear weapon. They could have used it on day one in 1973 war.
They had 13 bombs, and they probably have over 100
They did
now.
not use it, and they lost a lot of lives. They were practically defeated in that war until they threatened to use it. So it's a last resort of self-defense. These nations have it for this purpose. But when Saddam Hussein has it, my God, you're going to see something much more different than this.
We'll take a break and come back with our final moments with our guest. Stay tuned. 5:56. For now, before 6 o'clock, live from Washington, D.C., I'm Tom Leykis over KFI-AM 640. Time now to go to Mike Nolan, KFI on the Sky. Good evening, Mike. I want to talk to you about an ADT home security system. You know, it's been, my God, a year and a half since I had my home security system installed, and here I am in Washington, D.C., doing a live broadcast, but I know that back home in Los Angeles, my home is being protected by a state-of-the-art home security system that you can have installed in your home for only $395. That's it, only $395. ADT's been in the business of security for 117 years. They are the oldest and largest security system company in America, and they provide more home security systems than any other company in the world. Now you can get a new home security system just like the one I have in my home, installed for only $395. Call this number, 1-800-ADT-INFO. Get the details. There's no obligation. It's an ADT home security system. Call 1-800-ADT-INFO and tell them Tom Leykis of KFI. All right, we have a minute left here. Congressman Bob Dornan, how do you think this whole thing is going to play out?
Well, what I'm holding out for now is that one little line that the National Assembly put in there to Saddam Hussein today when they all cheered up and said, "So God is great" on our battle flags. They did say, however, you have total authority to do whatever it is to defend the dignity of Iraq. The dignity of Iraq will not be well served by having Tomahawk missiles be